I watched through the church's stained glass window as my mother's Mercedes pulled into the parking lot, exactly 45 minutes late. Too late. The ceremony was over. My new name was already written in the parish register in elegant calligraphy, sealed with holy water and the priest's blessing. They would never know what I had chosen to call myself in this second life. In my past life, they hadn't bothered to show up at all. My fingers traced the edge of my baptism certificate, still warm from Father Michael's hands. The name gleamed in fresh ink. Serafina Grace Moretti. Not Emma. Not Emma Chen, the daughter they had barely acknowledged. Not Emma, who had died alone in a psychiatric ward at 23, declared insane by her own family when she tried to expose their crimes. Serafina? My godmother, Lucia Moretti, whispered beside me. Her hand rested on my shoulder, warm and solid. Are you all right? I'm perfect, I said. And I meant it. I was 8 years old again, standing in the same Catholic church where my parents had been married, but this time I was protected. This time I had chosen differently. Through the window, I watched my mother exit her car, her Chanel suit immaculate, her face twisted in irritation rather than remorse. My father followed, checking his phone. My older brother, Marcus, stayed in the car, probably playing video games. They had forgotten. Just like they had forgotten my 10th birthday, my middle school graduation, every single parent-teacher conference that mattered. But this time, their forgetting was exactly what I had planned. Let me take you back to the beginning. Both beginnings. In my first life, I was born Emma Chen to Robert and Patricia Chen, successful real estate developers in San Francisco. I should have wanted for nothing. Instead, I wanted for everything that mattered. Attention, love, protection. My brother Marcus was 3 years older, golden child, star athlete, their whole world. I was the unexpected second pregnancy, the daughter they had never planned for, born at an inconvenient time when my mother was building her career. She went back to work 2 weeks after I was born. I was raised by a rotation of nannies who quit regularly because my parents never paid them on time. I learned early to be invisible. It hurt less that way. When I was 8, the first time I was 8, I had asked for a baptism. My best friend Sophia was being baptized, and I wanted to be part of the church community too. My mother had laughed. We're not religious, Emma. Don't be ridiculous. But in my first life, I had insisted. I had begged. Finally, they had agreed, more to shut me up than anything else. They promised to be there. I had worn a white dress I had bought with allowance money saved for months. I had waited in the church lobby for 2 hours while Father Michael gently suggested we reschedule. They never came, they never called. When I got home that night, they were hosting a dinner, party. They had forgotten entirely. That was the first time I understood that I truly didn't matter to them. The pattern continued for years. They forgot to pick me up from school regularly. I learned the bus routes. They forgot to buy groceries. I learned to cook at 9 years old. They forgot to sign my permission slips. I became an expert forger. They forgot my 13th birthday entirely. I took myself to a movie. But their forgetting was only the surface of the abuse. My mother, Patricia, was a narcissist of the highest order. Everything was about her image, her success, her social standing. I was an inconvenience, a burden, proof that she wasn't the perfect career woman she pretended to be. She told me regularly that I was lucky they kept me at all, that other parents would have given up a child as difficult and ungrateful as me. I wasn't difficult. I was desperate for love. My father, Robert, was a coward who enabled everything. He worked 18-hour days to avoid being home. When he was there, he pretended not to notice when Patricia berated me for existing, for eating too much, for breathing too loudly. He pretended not to notice when she would lock me in my room for entire weekends as punishment for imagined infractions. Marcus, my brother, was perhaps the worst. He was old enough to know better, but young enough to enjoy his status as the favorite. He actively sabotaged me, breaking my things and blaming me, spreading rumors about me at school, turning my few friends against me. He was a bully with parental approval. The financial abuse started when I turned 16. I had gotten a job at a local bookstore, proud to have my own money. My mother demanded I hand over my paychecks for household expenses. When I refused, she threatened to kick me out. I was 16, I complied. For 2 years, I gave them every penny I earned while they drove luxury cars and took vacations without me. I wore thrift store clothes while Marcus got a new wardrobe every season. I ate ramen in my room while they hosted elaborate dinner parties downstairs. I was their Cinderella, except there was no fairy godmother coming. I escaped to college on a full scholarship. My grades were perfect because school was my only refuge. I thought distance would help. It didn't. They demanded I come home every weekend to help with household chores. They called constantly, berating me for being selfish, for abandoning the family. My mother told everyone I was a troubled, rebellious daughter who had broken her heart. The truth was, I was thriving. For the first time, I had friends who actually liked me. I had professors who recognized my intelligence. I had a future. Then I met David Russo. David was beautiful, charming, from a wealthy Italian family. He seemed to adore me. He seemed to see me. After years of being invisible, his attention was intoxicating. I should have seen the red flags, the way he isolated me from my new friends, the way he criticized everything about me while calling it love, the way he slowly convinced me that I was lucky he put up with me, exactly what my mother had always said. By my junior year, I was trapped in a different kind of prison. David convinced me to drop out of school. He said he would take care of me, that I didn't need a degree, iced tea, that I should focus on our relationship. Desperate to be wanted, I agreed. That's when he introduced me to my parents' real business. Robert and Patricia Chen weren't just real estate developers. They were money launderers for several criminal organizations, using property transactions to clean millions in illegal funds. David's family was one of their clients. Our meeting hadn't been an accident. I had been an asset to be acquired. David groomed me for months, then handed me over to my parents with a simple message. Emma was ready to be useful. They were thrilled. Suddenly, I mattered. Suddenly, I was valuable because I could be their perfect scapegoat. They set up shell companies in my name. They forged my signature on documents. They made me the legal owner of properties I had never seen, the director of companies I knew nothing about. When I realized what they were doing, I tried to run. David stopped me. He had videos of me signing papers, coerced signatures that looked voluntary on camera. He had fabricated evidence that I had been an enthusiastic participant. He threatened to release everything if I didn't comply. I was 20 years old and completely trapped. For 3 years, I lived in a nightmare. I was the face of my family's criminal enterprise while reaping none of the benefits. I lived in a tiny apartment while they bought vacation homes. I drove a 15-year-old car while Marcus drove a Porsche. I was their puppet, their tool, their disposable daughter. I tried to go to the police. David found out before I could say a word. He had been monitoring my phone, my computer, my every move. The beating he gave me put me in the hospital for a week. My parents visited once, told the doctors I was clumsy, and left. I tried to run to another state. David found me within 24 hours. This time, the beating was worse. I tried to kill myself. I took every pill in my apartment and lay down in my bathtub ready for peace. I woke up 3 days later in a psychiatric ward, restrained to a bed. My parents had had me committed. They told the doctors I was delusional, paranoid, schizophrenic. They showed carefully curated evidence of my mental illness. Emails I had supposedly sent that I had never written, recordings of me saying things I had never said, all fabricated. They painted a picture of a daughter who had always been troubled, who had finally snapped, who was now making wild accusations against her loving family. The doctors believed them. Why wouldn't they? My parents were respected, wealthy, charming. I was a hysterical young woman with a suicide attempt on her record. They kept me medicated, heavily. I spent my days in a fog, unable to think clearly, unable to plan, unable to fight. My parents visited once a month, playing the role of concerned parents for the staff, while whispering threats in my ear when no one was watching. "You'll never get out," my mother said during one visit, her perfectly manicured hand patting mine with false affection. "You're ours forever now, and you'll take the fall for everything if the FBI ever comes knocking." I believed her. I spent 3 years in that facility, 3 years of forced medication, of doctors who saw me as a diagnosis rather than a person, of watching my youth slip away through barred windows. My mind deteriorated under the constant drugs. I forgot what it felt like to be sharp, to be myself. Then on a cold January morning, 2 weeks after my 23rd birthday, I simply gave up. I stopped eating. I stopped drinking. I refused all medication. The staff tried to force feed me, but I was stubborn. I had nothing left to live for, no hope of escape, no future but an endless drugged haze in this prison my parents had built for me. It took 11 days for my body to shut down. I died alone, strapped to a hospital bed with no one who loved me holding my hand. My last thought was relief. Then I woke up in my childhood bedroom, 8 years old, with every memory of my past life intact. The rebirth wasn't gentle. I woke up screaming, my adult mind trapped in a child's body, the memories of 23 years of abuse fresh and raw. For 3 days, I didn't speak. I couldn't. I was processing the impossible. My parents barely noticed my silence. They were too busy arguing about a property deal, but I noticed everything. I noticed the date. September 15th, I was 8 years old. I had 15 years of memories that hadn't happened yet. I had 15 years to change everything. The first thing I did was test my knowledge. I remembered news events, stock market changes, sports results. I spent hours in our home library reading newspapers online, confirming that I truly had traveled back in time. Everything matched my memories. The second thing I did was cry. I cried for the girl I had been, for the life I had lost, for the family I had never had. I grieved alone in my room silently because even at 8 years old, I knew better than to seek comfort from my parents. The third thing I did was plan. I knew how this story went. I knew every betrayal, every trap, every moment of suffering that was coming. But more importantly, I knew things they didn't. I knew about their illegal business. They were just starting the money laundering operation now, in its earliest stages. I knew about David Russo. He was currently a teenager, years away from entering my life. I knew about the property deals that would make them millions. And I knew that if I played my cards right, I could escape this family entirely. But I needed help. An 8-year-old girl, no matter how mature her mind, couldn't simply emancipate herself. I couldn't access money, couldn't live alone, couldn't escape my parents' legal custody. I needed an ally. I needed an adult with power who would believe me and protect me. That's when I remembered Lucia Moretti. In my first life, I had barely known Lucia. She was a family friend, someone my parents occasionally did business with, the widow of a wealthy construction company owner. She had been kind to me at a few dinner parties, but I had been too shy and broken to connect with her. But I remembered one crucial detail. Lucia Moretti hated my mother. At a party when I was 16, I had overheard Lucia and Patricia arguing in a hallway. Lucia had accused my mother of being a heartless social climber who treated her daughter like garbage. My mother had laughed it off, but I had seen the genuine anger in Lucia's eyes. Lucia had cared. She had noticed. She had been the only adult who had ever called out my parents' treatment of me. In this life, I would make sure Lucia did more than notice. I started my campaign carefully. At the next dinner party my parents hosted, one they forced me to attend to serve guests like an unpaid servant, I made sure to spend time near Lucia. I was polite, articulate, and subtly showed signs of the neglect I suffered. When Lucia asked me about school, I answered enthusiastically, showing the intelligence my parents always dismissed. When she complimented my dress, I quietly mentioned I had bought it myself with allowance money. When she asked about my hobbies, I mentioned the books I read alone in my room. Lucia was perceptive. I saw her eyes sharpen, saw her watching my mother ignore me, saw her notice when Patricia snapped at me for hovering around the guests. After that party, Lucia started calling the house asking for me specifically. She invited me to lunch, to the museum, to the theater. My parents agreed, pleased to have free babysitting and an opportunity to network with a wealthy widow. They had no idea they were sealing their own fate. Over the next 6 months, I carefully built a relationship with Lucia. I didn't tell her about the abuse directly. I was 8, and any accusations would seem like childish exaggeration. Instead, I showed her through actions. I showed up to our meetings in clothes that were too small, mentioned casually that my parents forgot to buy me new ones. I mentioned offhandedly that I hadn't seen them in 3 days because they were busy. I never complained, never accused. I simply let her see the truth. Lucia was a mother who had lost her only daughter to cancer 10 years earlier. She was wealthy, lonely, and desperately wanted to matter to a child again. She was also Italian Catholic, deeply religious, and had strong feelings about family and duty. She fell in love with me the way I had hoped she would, as the daughter she had lost. 8 months after I returned to my 8-year-old body, I made my move. Lucia said during one of our museum trips, I want to be baptized. Her face lit up. That's wonderful, Piccola. Have you talked to your parents? I asked them last year, I said quietly. They said no. They said religion is stupid. I watched anger flash across her face. They said that to you? I nodded, letting my eyes water just slightly. I know it's silly, but I see you go to church, and you seem so happy, so peaceful. I thought maybe if I was baptized, I could feel that way too. Lucia knelt down to my level right there in the museum, her hands on my shoulders. Emma, it's not silly at all. Faith is a gift. And if you want to be baptized, I will help you. But my parents, your parents, Lucia said firmly, don't own your soul. In the Catholic Church, any child old enough to understand the sacrament can request baptism. With a sponsor, a godparent, it can be done even without parental consent if the child's spiritual welfare is at stake. I had known this. I had researched it extensively in the church library, using my adult knowledge to navigate canon law. But I needed Lucia to be the one to suggest it, to feel like she was rescuing me. Would you be my godmother? I whispered. Tears filled her eyes. Oh, Emma, yes, I would be honored. Planning the baptism took 2 months. Lucia worked with Father Michael, a progressive priest who believed strongly in a child's right to spiritual education. They scheduled the ceremony for a Sunday afternoon in December. The clever part, the revenge part, was how we informed my parents. Lucia called them personally 2 weeks before the ceremony. She told them the date and time, told them it would mean the world to me if they came. They agreed absently, the way they always agreed to things involving me with no intention of following through. Then I made my own move. I went to my father's office one evening when he was home. Dad? I said quietly from his doorway. He looked up from his laptop, annoyed at the interruption. What, Emma? I'm being baptized in 2 weeks, Sunday, December 12th at 3 o'clock, at St. Mary's Cathedral. It would mean a lot if you came. He waved his hand dismissively. Yeah, sure, Lucia told us. We'll try to be there. Try meant no. I had one more card to play. Mrs. Moretti is paying for a reception afterward at the Grand Hotel. She invited some of her friends from her charity board. She said there will be important people there. Now I had his attention. Robert Chen never missed an opportunity to network with wealthy people. The Grand Hotel? That's expensive. She said she's happy to do it. She said I'm very special to her. I watched the calculations happening behind my father's eyes. Lucia Moretti was worth $50 million. Lucia Moretti sat on the boards of 3 major charities. Lucia Moretti had connections my parents desperately wanted. Okay, he said slowly, we'll definitely be there. 3 o'clock, you said? 3 o'clock, I confirmed. I didn't tell him that the ceremony was actually at 1 o'clock. The reception, the one with all of Lucia's influential friends, would be at 3 o'clock. The baptism itself, the intimate family ceremony, would be at 1. I left my father's office and went to my mother's home office, where she was on a conference call. I waited until she finished. Mom, I said, using the term loosely, I just wanted to confirm you're coming to my baptism, December 12th at 3 o'clock. She was checking her email, not looking at me. Yes, Emma, Lucia told me. We'll be there. It's at the Grand Hotel, the reception, I mean. That got her attention. Patricia loved showing off at expensive venues. The Grand Hotel? Lucia's really going all out for you. There was a strange tone in her voice, not quite jealousy, but close. She's been very kind to me, I said simply. Well, we'll definitely be there. 3 o'clock. Don't worry. I went to Marcus's room last. He was 14, deep in his obnoxious teenage phase. What do you want? He sneered when I knocked. I'm being baptized in 2 weeks. Mom and Dad said you have to come. He rolled his eyes. Do I have to? There's going to be fancy food at the Grand Hotel afterward. Lucia's paying for everything. Fine, whatever. When? 3 o'clock, December 12th? He had already turned back to his video game, dismissing me. Perfect. The trap was set. I had told them 3 o'clock, the time of the reception. The actual baptism ceremony was at 1 o'clock, with only Lucia, Father Michael, a few of Lucia's close friends as witnesses, and me. They would arrive 2 hours late after the sacrament was complete, after my new name was recorded, after I had legally become Serafina Grace Moretti, taking Lucia's surname as was traditional for godchildren in Italian families when the godparent had no other heirs. They would miss the entire ceremony, and they would never know what I had chosen to call myself in this new life. The morning of December 12th, Lucia picked me up at 9 o'clock. My parents were still sleeping. I had left a note on the kitchen counter. Lucia picked me up early. See you at the church. Emma. I wore the white dress Lucia had bought me. Silk and lace. Beautiful. Expensive. Everything the cheap polyester dress from my first life hadn't been. Lucia had also bought me new shoes, had arranged for a hairdresser to style my hair in loose curls. She made me feel precious. In the car, she held my hand. Are you nervous, Piccola? No, I said honestly. I'm happy. Your parents will be so proud to see you receive this sacrament. I didn't correct her optimism. Let her believe they would come on time. Let her be disappointed in them too. It would only strengthen her bond with me. We arrived at St. Mary's Cathedral at 10:30. Father Michael was waiting with warm hugs and a gentle smile. Lucia's friends from her charity board were there. 5 wealthy, influential women who had known Lucia for decades. They cooed over me, told me how beautiful I looked, told me how lucky I was to have Lucia as a godmother. I met with Father Michael privately for an hour, reviewing the meaning of the sacrament. In my first life, I had been genuinely seeking spiritual comfort. In this life, I was seeking legal protection. Because here's what my parents didn't know. When Lucia became my godmother in the Catholic Church, she also became my legal guardian in the event of my parents' incapacity or death. Lucia had already filed the paperwork with her lawyer. She had already updated her will to name me as her primary heir. I was 8 years old, and I had just secured a $50 million inheritance. The ceremony began at 1 o'clock sharp. Father Michael led me through the rite with patience and warmth. Lucia stood beside me, her hand on my shoulder, tears streaming down her face. When it came time to choose my baptismal name, I spoke clearly. I choose the name Serafina Grace. In Catholic baptism, you can add a saint's name. Serafina was a saint who had suffered greatly but maintained her faith. Grace was for the grace I wished I had received from my biological family. But then I added something unusual. Father, I would also like to take my godmother's surname. I want to be Serafina Grace Moretti. There was a sharp intake of breath from Lucia. Father Michael looked at her for confirmation. Is this acceptable to you, Mrs. Moretti? He asked. Lucia was openly crying now. Yes, she whispered. Yes, it's more than acceptable. It's an honor. In Italian Catholic tradition, godchildren sometimes took their godparent's surname, especially when the godparent was widowed and childless. It was a way of continuing the family name, of honoring the spiritual bond. It wasn't a legal name change, not yet, but it was recognized by the church. And it was the first step in my plan to sever myself from the Chen family entirely. The holy water touched my forehead. Father Michael's words washed over me. Lucia's tears fell on my hands as she held them. I was reborn again, this time into a family of my choosing. The ceremony ended at 2:15. We took photographs, we signed the registry. My new name gleamed in fresh ink, Serafina Grace Moretti, baptized on December 12th, with Lucia Maria Moretti as godmother. At 2:30, we went to the church parlor for tea and cake with Lucia's friends. They toasted my new life, told me stories about Lucia's late daughter Isabella, made me feel welcomed and loved. At 2:45, I saw the Mercedes pull into the parking lot through the parlor window, right on time for the reception that didn't exist yet. I watched my family get out of the car with a satisfaction I hadn't felt in either lifetime. My mother was dressed impeccably, ready to impress Lucia's wealthy friends. My father was checking his phone but had at least put on a suit. Marcus looked bored and irritated. They walked toward the church with the casual entitlement of people who believed their presence was a gift. Lucia noticed them too. "Oh, your family is here," she said, moving toward the door to greet them. "Wait," I said softly. "Let them come in." She looked at me curiously but nodded. My parents entered the church and looked around, confused. The sanctuary was empty, quiet. They checked their phones. Lucia said 3 o'clock, I heard my mother say irritably. They found their way to the parlor where we were having tea. When they entered, the room fell silent. Lucia's friends, wealthy, socially powerful women, stared at them with barely concealed judgment. Patricia! Robert! Lucia said, her voice strained with forced cheer. You're here. Of course we're here, my mother said, smiling her society smile. We wouldn't miss Emma's baptism. When does it start? The silence that followed was exquisite. Father Michael, who had been chatting with one of Lucia's friends, turned to face my parents. The baptism concluded about an hour ago, he said gently. The ceremony was at 1 o'clock. I watched my mother's face freeze. My father's eyes darted to me, then to Lucia, calculating. 1 o'clock? My mother said slowly. But Lucia told us 3. I told you December 12th at 3 o'clock, Lucia said, her voice cooling. I assumed you would understand I meant the ceremony would be earlier. The reception, which we're having now, is at 3. But I stepped forward before Lucia could take the full blame for my parents' failure. I told you 3 o'clock, I said quietly. I told all of you 3 o'clock. My father's eyes narrowed. He was starting to realize. But the ceremony was at 1, I continued, my 8-year-old voice steady. The ceremony was when I was baptized and given my new name. The ceremony was the important part, the part you missed. Emma, my mother said, her voice tight with warning. My name is Serafina now, I said. Serafina Grace Moretti. I watched the realization hit them. I watched my mother's face flush with humiliation as she understood that everyone in this room, all of Lucia's wealthy, influential friends, had witnessed her absence from her daughter's sacrament. I watched my father calculate the networking opportunities he had just lost. I watched Marcus shrug, indifferent to everything. You told us the wrong time, my mother said accusingly. You deliberately— I told you exactly what you asked, I interrupted. You asked when the reception was. That's all you cared about. The networking opportunity, the fancy hotel. You never asked about the actual ceremony. The room was deathly silent. Lucia's friends were watching with expressions that ranged from shock to satisfaction. These were women who valued family, who had children and grandchildren they adored. They were watching my parents' mask slip in real time. Well, my father said, trying to recover. We're here now. Maybe Father Michael could perform a quick blessing or— The sacrament is complete, Father Michael said firmly. Serafina has been baptized and welcomed into the church. Your presence now, while appreciated, is not necessary. It was the kindest fuck you I had ever heard a priest deliver. My mother's composure cracked. Emma, Serafina, this is ridiculous. You deliberately tricked us. You're 8 years old. This is some kind of— I asked you to come, I said simply. I told you the date and time. You agreed. You just didn't care enough to get the details right. Lucia put her arm around my shoulders, protective. I think perhaps it would be best if we discussed this later, she said diplomatically. This is supposed to be a celebration. But my mother wasn't done. You put her up to this, she hissed at Lucia. You've been poisoning her against us for months, buying her things, taking her places, making her think she's valuable, Lucia said, her voice cutting like ice. Making her think she deserves love and attention? Yes, Patricia, I'm guilty of that. The room erupted in soft murmurs. Lucia's friends were now openly glaring at my parents. My father, always the coward, grabbed my mother's arm. We should go, he muttered. Yes, I agreed. You should. They left without another word, Marcus trailing behind them, still playing on his phone, completely unaware of the significance of what had just happened. As the door closed behind them, Lucia's friend Margaret, a steel-haired woman who sat on the board of 3 hospitals, spoke up. Lucia, dear, she said carefully, is Emma, Serafina, is she all right? At home, I mean? And just like that, the seeds I had been planting for 8 months began to bloom. The conversation that followed was careful, delicate. I didn't accuse my parents of abuse directly. I didn't need to. Lucia's friends asked gentle questions, and I answered honestly. Are your parents home often? Not usually. They work a lot. Do they help you with your homework? I do it myself mostly. Do you have dinner together as a family? Sometimes. Usually I eat in my room. Each answer was simple, factual, and painted a devastating picture. Margaret and the other women exchanged looks that spoke volumes. These were not stupid women. These were not women who would ignore a child in need. Serafina, Margaret said gently, would you like to show me your baptism certificate? I handed it to her proudly. She read it carefully, her eyes pausing on my new name, on Lucia's name as godmother. This is beautiful, she said, and very official. She was noting the legal implications. I could see it in her eyes. The reception ended at 4:30. Lucia drove me home, her hands tight on the steering wheel. I'm sorry, she said finally. I'm sorry they let you down again. It's okay, I said. And it was. Everything had gone exactly as I had planned. Serafina, she said carefully, if you ever need anything, if things at home ever become, if you're ever not safe, you call me immediately. Do you understand? I understand. I mean it. Anytime, day or night, I will come get you. I looked at her, this woman who had been a stranger 8 months ago, who was now ready to fight for me. Thank you, Lucia. You're welcome, Piccola. You're so very welcome. She walked me to my door. My parents' cars were in the driveway, but the house was dark except for my father's office light. They couldn't even be bothered to greet me when I came home. Lucia saw it too. Her jaw tightened. Call me tomorrow, she said. I will. I went inside. The house was silent. I went to my room, changed out of my beautiful white dress, and hung it carefully in my closet. Then I sat at my desk and opened my journal, a new one Lucia had given me, leather-bound and expensive. I wrote, Day 1, as Serafina Grace Moretti. The baptism was perfect. The seeds are planted. Phase 1 complete. Beginning Phase 2, tomorrow. Phase 2 was about documentation. Over the next 6 months, I became a diligent record keeper. I documented everything. I took photos of the empty refrigerator with my disposable camera, photos of my room with its bare walls and hand-me-down furniture. I kept a diary of every time my parents forgot to pick me up from school, every dinner I ate alone, every parent-teacher conference they missed. I was careful. I never left the evidence where they could find it. I kept everything in a locked box in Lucia's home, where I spent increasingly more time. My parents barely noticed my absence. They were too busy with their real estate empire, which was growing rapidly. I knew from my first life that they were about to make their first major illegal deal, a property purchase that would launder $5 million for the Russo family. In my first life, I hadn't known this was happening. I had been oblivious, a child who didn't understand the adult world. In this life, I knew exactly what to look for. I started paying attention to my father's office. When he left his computer unlocked, I would casually walk by and memorize what was on the screen. When my parents had business dinners at home, I would serve drinks and listen quietly. I was 8 years old and no one thought I understood anything I was hearing. They were wrong. By the time I turned 9, I had a comprehensive list of shell companies, property addresses, and suspicious transactions. I didn't know what to do with this information yet. I was still too young to go to the authorities and be believed, but I was building a case file. Meanwhile, my relationship with Lucia deepened. She officially petitioned to be my legal guardian in the event of my parents' death or incapacity. My parents signed the papers without reading them, pleased to have someone else willing to take responsibility for me. They had just signed away their rights to me. Lucia also hired me a lawyer, a family friend who just wanted to make sure Emma's interests were protected. The lawyer, Antonio Benedetti, was sharp, experienced, and deeply Catholic. He met with me privately, asked careful questions about my home life, and began building his own case file. Serafina, he said during one meeting at Lucia's house, I want you to understand something. What I'm doing now is preparation. If your parents ever do anything that puts you in danger, physical, emotional, or otherwise, I will have everything ready to file for emergency custody for Lucia. Do you understand? I understand. You're a very mature young lady, he said, studying me with sharp eyes. More mature than most 9-year-olds. I smiled sweetly. I read a lot. He didn't look convinced, but he didn't push. The truth was, Antonio had already noticed the signs of neglect. The medical records showing I hadn't been to a dentist in 3 years. The school records showing my parents never responded to communications. The fact that Lucia was the emergency contact on all my forms, not my mother or father. The case was building itself. Then, when I was 9.5, my parents made a critical mistake. They forgot my birthday entirely. Not just forgot to celebrate, they forgot the day itself. I waited all day just to see if they would remember. They didn't. That night, my mother hosted a dinner party for Marcus's 15th birthday, which was 2 weeks away. She had forgotten mine but was planning his. I called Lucia from my room, tears in my voice that weren't entirely fake. They forgot? Lucia said, her voice shaking with rage. They forgot your birthday? It's okay, I whispered. I'm used to it. No, Lucia said firmly, it's not okay. Pack a bag. I'm coming to get you. But pack a bag, Serafina. You're staying with me for the weekend, and we're celebrating your birthday properly. She showed up 30 minutes later, marching into my house without knocking. My parents were downstairs with their party guests. Lucia found my mother in the kitchen, arranging appetizers. Patricia, Lucia said coldly, I'm taking Emma for the weekend. My mother looked annoyed. It's not a good time. We have guests. It's Emma's birthday. The room went silent. My mother's face went pale, then red. Oh, she said weakly, we've been so busy. Yes, Lucia said. Busy planning Marcus's party. In 2 weeks. But not busy enough to remember your daughter's actual birthday. Several of the party guests were watching now, their expressions uncomfortable. I'll make it up to her, my mother said quickly. No, Lucia said, you won't, because Emma is coming with me. She'll be back Sunday night. My mother started to protest, but my father appeared. He read the room quickly, saw the judging faces of their guests, and made the calculation. Of course, he said smoothly. That's very kind of you, Lucia. Emma, go pack a bag. I was already packed. Lucia took me to her home, a beautiful Victorian house in Pacific Heights. She had arranged a surprise party with her friends' grandchildren, kids my age who were kind and friendly. There was a cake with my name, my new name, Serafina. There were presents, games, laughter. It was the best birthday I had ever had in either life. That night, tucked into the guest room at Lucia's house, she sat on the edge of my bed. Serafina, she said gently, how often do your parents forget things like this? I could have lied. I could have downplayed it. Instead, I told her the truth. All the time, I whispered. They forget everything about me. I'm not important to them. Lucia's eyes filled with tears. You're important to me. I know. Would you? She paused, choosing her words carefully. Would you like to stay here? With me. Not just for the weekend. For longer? I looked at her, this woman who had become my true family, and made my voice small and hopeful. Really? Really, I'll talk to your parents. I'll talk to Antonio. We'll figure out the legal details. But if you want to live here with me, I want that too. I threw my arms around her neck and cried. Real tears this time, tears of relief and joy. Yes, I sobbed. Yes, please. The custody battle that followed was shorter than you might expect. My parents didn't fight for me. They put up a token resistance, hired a lawyer, made noises about their rights, but their hearts weren't in it. The truth was, they were relieved. I was an inconvenience they no longer had to manage. Antonio filed for emergency custody on Lucia's behalf, citing documented neglect. He presented the photos, the diary entries, the school records, the medical records. He brought in teachers who testified that I was often hungry, often wore clothes that didn't fit, was frequently left waiting for pickup long after school ended. He brought in Lucia's friends, wealthy, respectable women, who testified that they had witnessed my parents' neglect firsthand. The judge took one look at the evidence and granted temporary custody to Lucia pending a full hearing. My parents didn't show up to the full hearing. Their lawyer made excuses. They were busy with work. They had full confidence in Ms. Moretti. They believed this arrangement was in my best interest. The judge granted Lucia full legal custody. My parents were given supervised visitation rights, which they never exercised. I was 9 years old and I had successfully divorced my biological family. But I wasn't done. The next 6 years were the happiest of either of my lives. Lucia loved me the way parents should love their children, unconditionally, attentively, with genuine interest in who I was as a person. She enrolled me in the best private school in San Francisco. She made sure I had music lessons, art classes, sports if I wanted them. She showed up to every school event, cheered at every recital, helped with every homework assignment. She also gave me something invaluable: freedom to be myself. I had the mind of a 23-year-old in a child's body, and while I played the part of a precocious child, Lucia seemed to sense there was more to me. She never pushed, never questioned, but she gave me access to advanced books, adult conversations, real responsibilities. By the time I was 12, I was managing some of her charitable foundation's social media. By 14, I was helping her make investment decisions. By 15, I was sitting in on board meetings. Her friends thought she was grooming an heir. They weren't wrong, but I also had another project, documenting my parents' crimes. I couldn't let it go. Even safe with Lucia, even happy, I couldn't forget what they had done to me in my first life. I couldn't forget that they had murdered me, slowly, methodically, through years of abuse and 3 years of wrongful imprisonment. In this life, they wouldn't get the chance. I used my access to Lucia's resources carefully. I hired a private investigator using money from my allowance, claiming I wanted to find out about my family history. The PI, a retired police detective named Raymond Coe, was thorough. He found everything. By the time I was 16, I had evidence of 15 years of money laundering, tax evasion, fraud, and connections to organized crime. I had documents showing shell companies, wire transfers, property deeds that didn't match public records. I had enough to send both my parents to federal prison for decades. But I waited. I was patient. I had learned patience in my first life in those 3 years in the psychiatric ward. I could wait for the perfect moment. The perfect moment came when I was 17. David Russo entered my life right on schedule. In my first life, I had met him at a college party. In this life, I met him at a charity gala that Lucia dragged me to. He was 24, beautiful, charming, everything I remembered. He approached me with the same lines, the same smile, the same predatory interest disguised as genuine attraction. "You're Patricia Chen's daughter, aren't you?" he said, wine glass in hand. "No," I said coldly. I'm Lucia Moretti's daughter." He looked confused. "But I thought, you thought wrong." I walked away, leaving him standing there. But I knew he would report back to his family. I knew they would tell my parents. I knew my parents would be furious that I had publicly denied them. Sure enough, my mother called Lucia's house the next day, demanding to speak to me. "You embarrassed us," she hissed when I got on the phone. "At the Rivera Gala, you told people you're not our daughter." "I'm not," I said calmly. "Lucia has full custody. Legally, she's my mother now." "We're still your parents." "Biologically, not in any way that matters." "You ungrateful little—" I hung up. She called back immediately. I didn't answer. She called Lucia's house phone. Lucia answered, listened for 30 seconds, then said, "Patricia, you lost the right to make demands of Serafina the day you forgot her birthday and every day before that. Don't call again." She hung up too. I loved her so much in that moment. But David Russo wasn't done. He showed up at my school a week later, waiting by the parking lot. "Serafina," he called out. "I wanted to apologize. I didn't mean to upset you at the gala." I studied him, this man who had been the instrument of so much suffering in my first life. He was handsome, practiced, and utterly soulless. "You didn't upset me," I said. "You're just not worth my time." "I'd like to change that." Maybe we could get coffee, talk. No. I'm sorry? No, I know who you are, David Russo. I know what your family does. I know what my biological parents do. And I want nothing to do with any of you. His mask slipped for just a second, and I saw the predator underneath. You should be careful, he said softly. Making accusations like that. It's not an accusation if it's true. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. I know about the money laundering. I know about the shell companies. I know about the properties on Jackson Street and the wire transfers from Macau. I know everything. His face went pale. You're bluffing. Am I? Tell you what, go back to your family and to the Chens. Tell them Emma Chen is dead. Tell them Serafina Moretti knows exactly what they've been doing. And tell them if they come near me or Lucia ever again, I'll take everything I know to the FBI. I walked away, got into Lucia's car where her driver was waiting, and left David standing there. I watched through the back window as he pulled out his phone, urgently calling someone. Let him call, let them panic. The trap was almost ready to spring. That night, I told Lucia everything. Not about the rebirth, she would never believe that. But I told her I had been investigating my biological parents, that I had evidence of their crimes, that I had been threatened. I showed her the files Raymond Coe had compiled. I showed her the evidence. Lucia went white, then red, then cold with fury. They could have used you, she whispered. If you had stayed with them, they could have put everything in your name. I know. You could have gone to prison for their crimes. I know. She grabbed my hands. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I needed enough evidence to make sure they couldn't hurt you, or me, or anyone else. She pulled me into a fierce hug. We're taking this to the authorities. Not yet. Serafina? Not yet, I repeated firmly. I need to make sure there's no blowback on you. I need to make sure they can't claim you influenced me or that I stole the evidence illegally. I need to do this right. Lucia studied me for a long moment. You're not really 17, are you? My breath caught. What? I don't know how, I don't know why, but sometimes when you look at me, I see someone much older. Someone who has lived through something terrible. I could have denied it. I should have denied it. Instead, I told her a version of the truth. They hurt me badly, Lucia, in ways I can't fully explain. And I learned to be careful, to plan, to protect myself. Maybe that makes me seem older. She accepted this non-answer with a sad nod. I wish I had found you sooner, before they could hurt you at all. You found me at exactly the right time. 2 weeks later, my parents made their final mistake. They tried to kidnap me. I was leaving school when a car pulled up beside me. Marcus was driving. He was 21 now, still living off my parents' money, still their golden child. Get in, he said. Yeah. Mom and Dad want to talk to you. No. He got out of the car. He was bigger than me, stronger. I wasn't asking. But I wasn't the scared 8-year-old from my first life. I was a 17-year-old who had already died once and had spent 9 years preparing for exactly this moment. I had mace on my keychain. I sprayed him directly in the face. While he screamed, I ran toward the school's front entrance where a security guard was stationed. Call the police! I shouted. Someone tried to kidnap me! The security guard reacted immediately, calling 911 while putting himself between me and Marcus, who was stumbling around, crying and cursing. The police arrived within minutes. I pressed charges. I told them about the Russo family's threats, about my biological parents' attempts to contact me despite Lucia's custody, about feeling unsafe. Marcus was arrested for attempted kidnapping, and because he was an adult and I was a minor, because he had a weapon in his car, a knife the police found during their search, because I had physical evidence and a witness, he was charged with a felony. My parents hired the best lawyers money could buy, money they had laundered, money they had stolen. But it didn't matter, because the next day, I walked into the San Francisco FBI field office with Antonio, Lucia, and Raymond Coe, and I gave them everything. The special agent who took my statement was a woman named Diana Ortiz. She listened to my story with increasing focus, her pen moving rapidly across her notepad. You're saying you've been collecting evidence of money laundering operations since you were 9 years old? She asked carefully. Since I was 8, I corrected. I started noticing things when I still lived with them. I started documenting when I moved in with Mrs. Moretti. That's highly unusual for a child. I'm a highly unusual child. Agent Ortiz couldn't argue with that. I presented everything. Raymond Coe presented his investigative files. Antonio presented the legal documentation showing how my parents had neglected me, how they had given custody to Lucia without a fight, how they had recently tried to make contact against Lucia's wishes. We painted a picture of a criminal enterprise and a child they had tried to exploit. Agent Ortiz called in her supervisor. He called in a financial crimes specialist. They spent 6 hours going through the evidence. At the end, the supervisor looked at me with something like awe. This is a federal prosecutor's dream case, he said. We've been trying to build a case against the Russo family for years. You just handed us everything we need. I want immunity, I said calmly, for any documents that have my name on them. I wanted in writing that I was a minor, that I was coerced, that I had no knowledge of these crimes when they were committed. You were 8 years old. We're not prosecuting you. I want it in writing. They gave it to me in writing. The FBI raided my parents' home, offices, and properties 2 days later. They seized computers, files, bank records, everything. They arrested Robert and Patricia Chen on 15 counts of money laundering, 5 counts of wire fraud, 3 counts of tax evasion, and 1 count of racketeering. They arrested Marcus Chen on attempted kidnapping charges. And because the evidence was so comprehensive, because I had documented everything so meticulously, because the FBI now had enough to go after the Russo family as well, there would be no plea deals, no reduced sentences, no escape. My parents' lawyers tried. They argued entrapment, illegal evidence gathering, that I had been influenced by Lucia. But I was 17, articulate, and devastating on the witness stand. I told the truth. I told the jury about the years of neglect, about being forgotten, about watching them lavish everything on Marcus while I went without. I told them about the shell companies in my name, about the documents I had been made to sign. I cried when I described calling them on my birthday and having them forget who I was. I was convincing because it was true. The jury convicted on all counts. Robert Chen, 25 years in federal prison. Patricia Chen, 23 years in federal prison. Marcus Chen, 8 years in state prison for the kidnapping attempt, plus additional charges related to the family business once he turned 18 and started actively participating. The Russo family, including David, faced similar sentences. The entire operation crumbled. I was 18 when the verdicts came in. Lucia and I sat in the courtroom holding hands as the judge read each count. Guilty, guilty, guilty. My mother looked at me across the courtroom with pure hatred. My father wouldn't meet my eyes. Marcus cried, begging for mercy. I felt nothing but satisfaction. The trial made national news. Teenage girl takes down money laundering empire, read one headline. From neglected daughter to FBI informant, read another. I became briefly famous, which I hated, but I used the platform carefully. I spoke about child neglect, about abuse, about the importance of finding a real family, not just a biological one. Lucia was with me for every interview, every appearance, her hand on my shoulder. When the media frenzy finally died down, I went to college. Stanford, full scholarship, studying business and law. Lucia was so proud she cried. I thrived in college this time. I had real friends, healthy relationships, a future I had built for myself. I dated carefully, rejecting anyone who reminded me even slightly of David. I focused on my studies and on building a life worth living. And I stayed close to Lucia, my real mother, in every way that mattered. When I graduated summa cum laude at 22, she was in the front row, cheering louder than anyone. I'm so proud of you, Piccola, she said, hugging me tight. I couldn't have done any of it without you. You would have, she said firmly. You're the strongest person I know. I thought about the girl I had been in my first life. Broken, trapped, dying alone in a psychiatric ward. I thought about the choice I had made in this life to save myself. I had help, I said. I had you. 5 years later, I took over as CEO of Lucia's charitable foundation. We expanded operations, helped hundreds of children in situations like mine, funded programs for family reunification when possible and adoption when necessary. I used my story, carefully edited, to raise millions in donations. I also started a legal advocacy group for children's rights with Antonio as lead counsel. We took on cases of child neglect and abuse, winning custody battles, putting abusive parents in prison, saving kids who couldn't save themselves. I became the advocate I had needed in my first life. Lucia lived to see all of it. She lived to see me married to a kind, gentle man who loved me for who I was. She lived to see me have children, two beautiful daughters I named Isabella and Grace. She held my first daughter, Isabella, named after her lost child, and cried tears of joy. "I never thought I'd hold a grandchild," she whispered. "You're not just my mother," I told her. "You're my everything." She died peacefully in her sleep at 87, surrounded by love, her hand in mine. At her funeral, I stood at the pulpit and told the truth about what she had done for me. "Lucia Moretti saved my life," I said to the packed cathedral. "She saw a child no one else saw. She loved a child no one else loved. She gave me her name, her home, her heart. And in return, I tried every day to be worthy of that gift." I paused, looking at the same stained glass window where I had watched my biological parents arrive too late, so many years ago. My baptism as Serafina Grace Moretti was the day I was truly born. It was the day I chose my family instead of being stuck with the one I was given. It was the day I learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do was walk away from people who hurt you and toward people who love you. Lucia taught me that, and I will spend the rest of my life teaching others the same lesson. After the funeral, I visited my parents in prison. I hadn't seen them in 15 years. They were old now, broken by prison life. My mother's perfect hair was gray and thin. My father was stooped, defeated. They sat across from me in the visiting room with expressions of hope that I was here to forgive, to offer support, to be the daughter they had never deserved. I let them hope for a moment. Then I spoke. "I wanted you to know that Lucia died," I said calmly. "She left me everything. The house, the foundation, her entire estate. $50 million plus the growth from investments over the years. I'm a very wealthy woman." My mother's face twisted with jealousy and rage. "I also wanted you to know that I have a family now, 2 daughters. Beautiful, brilliant, loved. They will never know you exist. I've told them their grandmother died happy and fulfilled, which is true. Lucia was their grandmother in every way that matters." "Emma," my father started. "Oshal. My name is Serafina," I cut him off. "Emma Chen died the day you forgot her baptism. She died the day you proved you cared more about networking opportunities than your own daughter. She died long before I walked into the FBI office." "You destroyed our lives," my mother hissed. "No," I said firmly. I saved mine. You destroyed your own lives with your greed and your cruelty. I just made sure you faced consequences for once." I stood up to leave. "Wait," my father said desperately. "We're sorry. We were bad parents, we were wrong, but we're still your family. You're not my family," I said. "You never were. My family was waiting for me in a church, celebrating my baptism, giving me a new name, loving me unconditionally. You were just the people who happened to share my DNA." I walked out and never looked back. Now, 30 years after that baptism ceremony, I sit in the same cathedral where I became Serafina Grace Moretti. My daughters are grown, successful, happy. My husband sits beside me, his hand in mine. My grandchildren, Isabella's twins, play quietly in the pew behind us. I come here every year on December 12th, the anniversary of my rebirth. Father Michael is long retired, but the current priest knows my story. He knows about the baptism where the parents arrived too late. He knows about Lucia, whose portrait hangs in the parish hall with the title Beloved Benefactor. I light a candle for her, as I do every year. "Thank you," I whisper to her memory. "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. Thank you for loving me when I was unloved. Thank you for giving me your name." I touch the baptism certificate I still carry in my wallet. The ink faded, but the words still clear. Serafina Grace Moretti, baptized December 12th, with Lucia Maria Moretti as godmother, the name my biological parents never knew I had chosen, the name that saved my life. I think about the girl I was in my first life, Emma Chen, trapped, abused, dying alone in a psychiatric ward. I think about the choice I made when I woke up with a second chance to save myself, to choose better, to find real love. I made it true. Every word of the plan I had written in my journal that first night. Phase 1 complete, phase 2 complete, phase 3, living a life worth living, complete. My phone buzzes with a text from Isabella. Mom, we're outside, ready for lunch? I smile, kiss my fingers, and press them to Lucia's memorial plaque on the wall. Then I walk out into the sunlight, into my beautiful life, surrounded by people who love me not because they have to, but because they choose to. Just as I chose them, just as Lucia chose me on that December day 30 years ago when she held my hand and welcomed me into her family, into her heart, into her name. My parents missed my baptism ceremony. They never knew my new name, and that was exactly how it was supposed to be. Because Serafina Grace Moretti, strong, loved, vindicated, was never theirs to name. She was always mine.